I'm a police detective, and I cover every mirror in my house at night. I became a detective a little over 1 year ago after spending 5 years on the beat. Any case I've worked on has always been clear-cut, no questions left unanswered, concrete evidence, confessions. But there was one case, is still one case, that leaves a lot of unanswered questions, questions of which, I suspect, may not have an answer grounded in scientific rationale. As a disclaimer before I begin, I'm not superstitious, nor do I believe in ghosts or anything that can be termed the paranormal. Having said that, here's what happened. I didn't choose this case, but rather it was thrust upon me with the death of a colleague who was in charge of its investigation. He was a senior detective, 28 years experience. On the morning after the first night of the investigation, he was found dead in his home. His body was huddled into the back of the walk-in closet of his bedroom. The coroner cited sudden cardiac arrest as the cause of death. The bedroom door and the door to the closet were both shut at the time. And the photographs, I'll have more to say about them later. I was given a case file on a family of 3 who were living in a small flat in the West Isle of Wight, United Kingdom. The family were Korean immigrants. There was a father, mother, and an infant girl. The case involved the sudden death of the 38-year-old mother. She was found collapsed on the floor of her bedroom. As the crime scene reports indicated, she seemed to have died while in the middle of applying her makeup. More to follow. The husband, who was initially suspected to be the perpetrator, committed suicide a few days after. He was questioned for 48 hours, then released, due to return 24 hours later. He was found in his van in the garage of the block of flats. A hose was attached to the exhaust, with the other end stuck in the window. The air vents were duct taped shut. The infant girl was never found and was passed on to the missing persons case officers, although now I think she will never, ever be found. When I visited the crime scene myself, things in the flat and some further evidence that I had collected just didn't seem right. I would even say unnatural. Together with a junior detective, I visited the scene roughly 70 hours after the incident took place. It was still classified as a warm crime scene. That is to say, things were mostly left untouched, and as they were at the time of the discovery. Some evidence was removed, however. I'll start with the kitchen. On the counter next to the sink were diced pumpkins, dried and crusty, and in a bowl next to it, some pieces had been mashed into a fine paste. This was presumably for the baby girl. The living room was otherwise normal. It was clean and well maintained. There was a large bookshelf on the southern wall of the room which housed around 50 books. All of the books were in Korean, so naturally I couldn't understand the titles, but when I opened some of them, they all appeared to deal with subjects relating to the occult or traditional Korean pagan beliefs. I gathered this from the photographs and drawings. On the arm of the sofa, a book was open at a page which showed a zodiac calendar. It looked like a traditional Chinese one with all the animals around it. Next to this was a diary, the mother's, open at the yearly calendar page. A large red circle was around one of the dates. Incidentally, this was the date her body was found and the day the daughter went missing. At this time, my partner mentioned he had a Korean friend growing up in London. He added that whenever he went to their house at night, all the mirrors in the house were covered with sheets. He asked his friend about this, who embarrassing said that it was a silly Korean superstition. At night, he was told, witches could enter his world through mirrors. They come to our world to steal babies and bring them back to hell with them. I shrugged this information off when I heard it, a silly superstition. I'd still like to believe that now. On the table in the middle of the room was a small bowl of half-eaten pumpkin mash. There had been something which the initial crime scene investigators had marked on the floor beside the table. There was a long line of something on the floor from just next to the table which ran across the room, through the kitchen, and into the parents' bedroom, incidentally the site of the mother's body. Taking a closer look, I could see it was a long, thin streak of saliva which contained traces of pumpkin. Every few feet or so between the living room table and the bedroom could be found small puddles of saliva with the pumpkin mixed with it. This suggests as per the initial police report, that the baby had crawled from the table to the bedroom and came to a stop at the dresser. My partner asked me for permission to go and ask further questions of the residents living on the same floor, and I was left alone in the flat to continue my investigations into the other rooms. It was in the bedroom where I experienced something that to this day I cannot explain. I looked at the spot on the floor where the mother's body was found. The cause of death was ruled as a severe heart attack, and death was instant. This is in spite of her having no history of cardiac illness, nor such any instances in her immediate family. The photos of the body showed her face up, her face suggesting she died in a state of shock or fear. Her eyes were wide open and bulging from their sockets, her mouth jarred agape as far as it could. She was frozen like this, as if someone had shown her a scary image and pressed pause on her reaction. That's the best way I can describe her state in the photograph. She was clutching a hairbrush too. Now I'll tell you about the mirror that was sitting atop the dresser. It was a normal-looking vanity mirror, pearl inlay border, and propped up by a small stand at the back. It looked like an antique. Perhaps it's something I have acquired in my years on the job. Call it an intuitive sense, but I could sense something coming from the mirror. It had a presence, one that was not existent in the other rooms. It was as if the mirror was the focal point of the entire room. It occupied the whole space as if it were alive. What is more, anytime I turned away from it, I felt a sense of being watched. I know it sounds corny and cliched, but I know when I'm being watched. Not only watched, but menaced. It comes with the job and is a necessary survival tool for any law enforcement person. As I was standing in front of the mirror with my back to it, looking at another part of the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of danger from behind. It felt like an impending blow to the head. There was definitely an intent to harm. Startled, I spun around. I immediately noticed my reflection in the mirror. The reflection was of me, of course. But it was me from behind. I was looking at myself from a position behind my body, as if through someone else's eyes. Then the image in the mirror started to slowly lurch toward me. In a flash, I pulled my firearm out of my hip holster and spun around. There was just an empty room, the same as it had been when I entered. I spun back around to face the mirror, gun still held at eye level, and the reflection was of me again, from the front. I stood like this for quite some time, half expecting the image in the mirror to change again. Once my heart stopped beating in my throat, I holstered my weapon and checked around the mirror for anything like a pinhole camera or other device that might make it possible to project an image on its surface from a remote source. A check of the bedroom also revealed no such devices. I decided to take the mirror as more evidence of the crime scene. Perhaps forensics can find something with it and, more to the point, find something that would give me peace of mind about what I had just seen. I put the mirror in a sealed plastic evidence bag and placed it on the back seat, then called my partner's radio to tell him we were leaving. The whole time driving back to the station, I had the sensation that someone was sitting in the back seat. So strong was the sensation, and still feeling rattled from what I had experienced in the flat, I grew fearsome of looking in the rearview mirror. After handing in the mirror to the forensics team, I decided to look over the case photos again, and as I did so, I became aware of a terrifying similarity. All of the deceased, including my senior who passed several days before, all had the same expression on their face. The only words to describe it would be pure horror. The way their eyes had distended in terror, their mouths distorted in their final scream or plea for mercy, and the way they all seemed to be trying to escape from whatever they were seeing. The mother's body was turned in one direction, her head twisted in the other. The father had his head buried into the cushions of the back seat of the car, and the senior detective was cowering in fear at the back of his closet, which contained a full-length mirror. All three had died in front of a mirror of some sort. Had they seen what I saw? That day as I was leaving, I happened to bump into the forensics officer whom I'd handed the mirror to. "Evening, sir," he said. "We had a spot of trouble with your mirror." "Oh?" I said. "Yeah. We couldn't get to the handprint that was left on it." I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. There may have indeed been a handprint on it, but in my haste to leave, I failed to notice it. Handprint? I asked. Yeah, tiny little thing, like this. He spread his thumb and index finger apart to indicate the size of the hand. I'd say they were around 8 or 9 months old, definitely an infant. He shook his head in disbelief. This sent an ice-cold wave of recognition through me. It must belong to the daughter. What do you mean you couldn't get to it? I asked. He waited for 2 other staff to walk past and out of earshot before he answered. Well, the handprint, sir. He looked around again. It had been put on the glass from the other side. Other side of what? I asked. The mirror, he said. My stomach sank, and I instantly thought of the things my partner had told me about the superstitions involving mirrors. Are you sure? I pressed him. We're fairly sure, sir. We've taken thousands of prints from glass surfaces and other reflective materials, but we've never seen something like this. He held up his hands. It's a mystery. I started to feel lightheaded. He patted me on the shoulder, but that's for you guys to solve, right? With that cheerful jibe, he left me standing confused and exhausted in the corridor. I remained that way until his footsteps receded out of earshot. The mirror was never used as evidence, and it was co-signed to a file cabinet somewhere in storage, never to be taken out or spoken of again. The handprint was just passed off as a manufacturing defect. The whole case is now cold, unsolved. 2 sudden deaths of natural causes, a missing child, and a suicide from being unable to cope with the grief. That's how it ended. For me, however, I cover every mirror in the house when the sun goes down.